Hi and welcome to my video on 10 essential jazz albums. Over the years I've kind of dipped in and out of jazz. There just hasn't been the time to really immerse myself in the genre. But over this past year, 2020 to 2021, I find myself listening to more and more jazz. So I thought I'd like to make a video going over looking at some of my favourites. Also, I thought it might act as a kind of introduction for anyone wishing to start listening to jazz. So, in no particular order, Zawinul from 1971. This is taken from Zawinul Online. Legendary musician Joe Zawinul was one of the most influential jazz musicians of the 20th century. He was a pioneer in the use of electronic musical instruments, bringing the electric piano into the mainstream, and possessed an unparalleled ability to make the synthesizer an expressive musical instrument. He composed some of the best known standards in jazz, including Mercy, Mercy, Mercy and Birdland. With Wayne Shorter, Joe founded and led Weather Report, arguably the most creative and successful band of post-60s jazz. His unique combination of jazz fused with ethnic music from around the globe blazed the trail for what would be later called world music. Ultimately, Joe carved out a singular musical voice that is immediately identifiable and defies categorization. Joe was born in Austria in 1932 and went to the Vienna Conservatory in 1939, where he was recognized as a young piano prodigy. But as a child of poor parents, the war years for the Zawinul family were very, very tough. Zawinul, the album, is like a series of snapshots of Joe's life. And even though most of the musicians are American, it feels deeply rooted in European jazz. It has the lyricism of European composers like Alban Berg, but woven into that the soulfulness of Miles and Coltrane. Joe's work, they say, also influenced ambient composers like Eno and Harold Budd. It's a wonderful, evocative gem of an album from a true musical giant. Next up, Kind of Blue, Miles Davis. People say if you want to start listening to jazz, Kind of Blue is the place to start. There's a reason why it's often cited as the biggest selling jazz album of all time. Quincy Jones, one of Miles Davis's longtime friends, wrote, "Kind of Blue will always be my music, man. I play Kind of Blue every day. It's my orange juice. It still sounds like it was made yesterday." Chick Corea, one of Miles' acolytes, states, "It's one thing to play a tune or to play a program of music, but it's another thing to practically create a new language of music, which is what Kind of Blue did." Personally, I think one of the reasons that the album is so popular is it's so melodic, despite the complexity of the music. For example, take a listen to the opening track, So What. Listen to Paul Chambers' bass playing behind the main reoccurring riff. It's so funky, and like they say, it could have been recorded yesterday. AllMusic senior editor Stephen Thomas Erlewine stated, "Kind of Blue isn't merely an artistic highlight for Miles Davis. It's an album that towers above its peers, a record generally considered as the definitive jazz album, a universally acknowledged standard of excellence." Why does Kind of Blue possess such a mystique? Perhaps because the music never flaunts its genius. It's the pinnacle of modal jazz, tonality and solos built from the overall key, not chord changes, giving the music a subtle, shifting quality. It may be a stretch to say that if you don't like Kind of Blue, you don't like jazz, but it's hard to imagine it as anything other than a cornerstone of any jazz collection. Miles Davis, Jack Johnson. Around the late 1960s, early 70s, Miles Davis started to move into the world of jazz fusion, jazz rock, at the same time adding in elements of funk and soul. And while Bitches Brew, In a Silent Way, Live Evil were all acclaimed by the critics, Jack Johnson went largely unnoticed and somewhat ignored. The album is actually a soundtrack for a documentary on the boxer Jack Johnson. Jack Johnson's story is well worth checking out if you've got a mind to. Miles Davis was a huge boxing fan. He went to a boxing gym every day, and when on tour he actually took a boxing trainer with him. For the album, Miles assembled a stellar cast of musicians. Miles Davis on trumpet, Steve Grossman on soprano saxophone, John McLaughlin on electric guitar, Herbie Hancock on organ, Michael Henderson on electric bass, Billy Cobham on drums, and Brock Peters did some narration. A few months before the album's release, Miles Davis had said to Rolling Stone that he wanted to create the best rock and roll band you have ever heard. And here he does that, as the band laid down an incredible foundation for McLaughlin and Miles to blur the boundaries between rock, jazz, funk and soul with some incredible soloing. In fact, Right Now, which takes up the whole entire first side, contains a riff based on Sly and the Family Stone's Sing a Simple Song, while side 2's Yesternow is built around the bass line from James Brown's Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. Jack Johnson might well provide the perfect bridge from rock to jazz. Album number 4, Jaco Pistorius by Jaco Pistorius. I did a full review of this wonderful record a while back. There will be a link in the description below. Jaco, the Jimi Hendrix of the bass guitar. Next up, Black Market by Weather Report. London sweltered in the summer of 1976, a heat wave that started around the end of May and went on for months. A lot of the record shops in the capital decided that a great move would be to set up speakers out there in the street, and they would play Black Market in its entirety. It seemed to fit in perfectly with the sweltering heat. The market chatter on Black Market, the sounds of a train on the tracks, Barbary Coast, and the ship's horn on Gibraltar all suggest journeys to places hot, humid and exotic. And the music echoes this, gloriously funky with African, Cuban, Brazilian rhythms, while on Cannonball or Three Clowns the playing is cool, sophisticated and elegant. Joe Zawinul on all manner of electronic keyboards and Wayne Shorter on sax seem to have distilled down unnecessary soloing and controlled their playing. They've condensed it into lyrical, beautiful, melodic lines, and it provides their most satisfying and engaging album for me. From Black Market, I started to explore Wayne Shorter and his solo career, and so far I'd have to say the best one I've come across, well, my favourite, is an album called Speak No Evil. Wayne Shorter, I was thinking of misty landscapes with wild flowers and strange, dimly lit figures, the kind of places where folklore and legends are born. As a result, the music is moody and incredibly atmospheric. Wayne Shorter is a master of building up tension and then releasing it. And as usual, he's melodic as hell. And the musicians he's assembled around him are pretty damn fine also. You have Freddie Hubbard on trumpet, the great Herbie Hancock on piano, Ron Carter on bass and Elvin Jones on drums. Rough Guide author Ian Carr wrote, "It's a classic album in terms of composition, and it's been inspirational to hundreds of other musicians. All I can say to you is lay back, kick back, turn down the lights, pour a glass of red and let Wayne weave his magic spell and take you to the land of giants, folklore and witches and things that go bump in the night." John Coltrane, A Love Supreme. In the 1970s, I'd heard and read tons about what an amazing, brilliant musician John Coltrane was. All the stories of him falling asleep with the sax in his mouth after endless hours of practice. John McLaughlin, Carlos Santana even making a tribute record, Love, Devotion and Surrender. So I went out and I bought A Love Supreme. And I'm sad to say I didn't get it. Normally I can hone into a musician's flow and feel it, and it kind of all fits into place. But I Love Supreme just left me cold. After many listens, I came to the conclusion that jazz at that time just wasn't for me. Then one day, many years later, I was painting a house and I decided to give the album another spin. It'd been sitting in my record collection just gathering dust. You know what? I must have played that album 8, 9, 10 times back to back. It finally made sense and the genius of John Coltrane hit me like a runaway freight train. McCoy Tyner, who played piano, says there was an amazing unspoken communication during those sessions. The result of all the years of playing live together. Listen deeply and you will hear an almost telepathic interplay between Coltrane, Tyner, Jimmy Garrison on double bass and Elvin Jones on drums. If you want to hear a musician or bunch of musicians put their heart and soul on the line, just take a listen to A Love Supreme. At times it feels like Coltrane is blowing the insides out of his instrument. Such is his passion, and I can't emphasize enough how much this man put into his music. The passion, the feel, the vibrancy is just incredible. Giant Steps, another gem from John Coltrane. They say the opening track is one of the hardest, most difficult to master pieces of music ever. Giant Steps has become a test piece for jazz musicians and required fare in jazz education programs. There are 26 chord changes in the 16-bar theme of Giant Steps, but don't let all that put you off. It's a quite wonderful piece of music. Yes, I know sometimes when you read and listen to people talking about Trane's music, you feel like you need a degree or a doctorate in music to even begin to understand it. But that's so far from the truth. Like I said earlier, the power, the energy, the sheer joy the man put into his music shines through above all the incredible technical virtuosity. Giant Steps, the whole record is moving and uplifting, and it gives you such a buzz. It's a journey I urge you to take. Album number 9, Word of Mouth by Jaco Pistorius. Word of Mouth is a record I think you have to invest time and energy into it, for I feel it's only over repeated listens, a lot of repeated listens, does it start to open up and fully reveal the magic encased in its grooves. For example, the opening track, Crisis. If you just listen to it the one-off, a lot of people will say that it's just a cacophony, a discordant cacophony. It's set over looping bass patterns from Jaco, and this provides a bedrock for some frantic, intertwining improvisational solos from sax, piano and flute. It's brutal and uncompromising, but within the context of the album, it builds the tension perfectly to lead us into the next track, the beautiful 3 Views of a Secret. After the frantic, anxious moments of Crisis, Jaco builds us up and then drops us into the beautiful balm of 3 Views of a Secret, which is quite simply beautiful, where Jaco combines big band jazz with an orchestra. He also includes Toots Thielman on harmonica, and of course the man himself, Jaco Pistorius, adding deft touches of light and shade with his bass guitar. Liberty City is another slice of big band jazz featuring Herbie Hancock, Toots and Jaco, and they bounce off each other for 12 exhilarating minutes. Next up is Chromatic Fantasy, where Jaco decides to perform an horrendously difficult Bach piece on 4-string fretless electric bass, and does it superbly. He follows this by a light, airy jaunt through the Beatles' Blackbird. A strange combination, you might think. Bach and the Beatles? Not quite. Paul McCartney wrote that the guitar part for Blackbird was actually inspired by Bach's Bourrée in E minor. I'm guessing Jaco, being the clever musician he is, spotted that link and combined the 2 songs. Next up, the title track, Word of Mouth. Often during live performances, Jaco would play Jimi Hendrix songs. Purple Haze, Third Stone from the Sun. Here he cranks his amps up to 11, bass distorted as hell, and channels his inner Hendrix and shows why he was dubbed the Hendrix of the bass guitar and takes no prisoners. It's such a shame that Jaco and Jimmy never got the chance to play together. John and Mary finishes the album and it's another minor masterpiece. It's woven around steel drums, Herbie Hancock's piano, Jaco's bass and some truly magnificent playing by Wayne Shorter. At 4 minutes 43 seconds, strings and flute lead us into part 2 of the piece. There's wordless vocals from Jaco and a choir to the accompaniment of drums, steel drums, flute and Wayne Shorter again. As the music swells and swirls, remember it's Jaco who composed, arranged and conducted all of this. The track is dedicated to Jaco's children from his first marriage, John and Mary, and vocal snippets of the two can be heard throughout the piece. Yes, word of mouth at times can be difficult and very challenging, but well worth the investment. And last but not least, Joe Sample, Rainbow Seeker. Joe was a member of the Crusaders for many years and was always in demand as a session musician. Joni Mitchell, Rod Stewart, Steely Dan, to name a few. And he was also one of the pioneers of the electronic keyboards back in the 1960s. When this album first came out, many dismissed it as jazz light, smooth jazz, good background music. But here's the trick. If you actually listen, go beyond the smooth veneer. It's a lot more than that. Joe was incredibly melodic and lyrical, and boy does his playing swing. Once he ropes you in, you come across an oasis of funky, hypnotic grooves, impeccable rhythmic timing. Once Joe is in the groove, there's no stopping him. He swings, he flows, it's addictive, and it makes you feel good. So check out Rainbow Seeker, you won't be disappointed. So there you have it, 10 of my favourite jazz albums. I hope you liked the video. I'd love to hear your comments and some of your favourite albums. What are your favourite jazz albums? Please drop your comments in the comment section below the video. Please take care, stay safe, and of course, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and there's plenty more to come.